Hey everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Passwordless POV. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, technology correspondent Lisa Martin. Happy New Year, everyone. And speaking of New Year, we've got two great guests here. We're going to be reflecting back on cybersecurity trends from 2023 and have a peek ahead at what we may see in 2024. Please welcome back to the show for the third time our great duo of Alex Cox, Director of Information Security at LastPass, and Mike Kosak, Senior Principal Intelligence Analyst. Guys, welcome back. Happy New Year. Great to see you.
Likewise.
Yeah, thank you, and Happy New Year.
Yeah, let's take a walk back through 2023. Some of the highlights that we saw included this massive proliferation of IoT devices, deployment of 5G technologies, supply chain vulnerabilities. Today, we're going to focus on how that's affecting the hybrid working environment. They're here to stay. We see it all over the news. And there's implications from a cybersecurity perspective. Alex, let's start with you. Talk about some of those implications that we're seeing, like the expansion of the attack surface, and what vulnerabilities might we see as a result?
Yeah, sure, Lisa, thank you. If you think back a few years to when the pandemic started, we saw a huge move of employees from being in office to being fully remote. And in a lot of cases, it was like 95, 97% of a company's workforce was remote. In the subsequent time, we've seen now a pull back on that where the companies are saying, okay, come on back in part of the time and, work through this hybrid work environment. What's interesting about that is like a fully in office company and then a fully remote company both have, security mechanisms and needs that are somewhat singular, right? If most of your workforce is remote, then the security apparatus and the security controls need to be sort of focused on a remote workforce. If they're all in office, then they need to be focused on an office workforce. The challenge with a hybrid workforce is now that you've got both of those, right? You've got both remote employees and you've got in-office employees, and they kind of go back and forth. So, when you think about how to protect your employees, how to protect your data, you're now essentially trying to protect two different environments. One, the in-office environment is typically fairly easy to secure because you have control over all of that infrastructure and the processes and the tech you can deploy from a security standpoint. Not as much so with a remote employee because they're using their own networks, they're using their own routers, they're potentially using their own equipment, and all of those things sort of play a part in how you secure your data. So the challenge is really around managing that remote infrastructure in a way that makes sense for your threat focus. When we talk about cyber threats, it's basically looking at how I can focus my controls in a way that and it's that classic argument versus technology and security. How do I focus my controls to make my employees effective in a hybrid environment, but not to the point that it impacts security? So it's just a really challenging way to approach the work environment, and it just adds a significant level of complexity to some of the things you have to do from a protection standpoint. The human factor is a huge part in both places.
Yeah.
Like, when I think about, using the both the remote and in-office, in-office work environments, the same things matter, right? Strong passwords, password manager, looking for phishing, updating and patching your systems, all those things still count. So while there is some difference and there's an approach from a security apparatus standpoint that the security team needs to think about, on the user side, some of the common things you do apply to both environments.
Definitely. You talked about the expansion of the attack surface, cyber threats only increasing. So it seems, Alex, from what you're saying, it's essential that organizations, especially in this hybrid environment that's likely here to stay, reevaluate their security protocols. You also mentioned the human factor. I have a friend that has this great sticker, it says humans ruining everything since forever. But it's a huge challenge that organizations across industries have. We talked about that back in a few months ago, Cybersecurity Awareness Month on our show. Some of the core behaviors that organizations and people need to adopt: strong passwords, employ a password manager, recognize and avoid phishing attempts, which are getting far more sophisticated and personal, and of course, regularly updating and patching systems, really critical. Mike, let's bring you into the conversation now. Cyber attacks targeting remote environments. What is fueling this, and how can organizations really kind of come back to the complexity that Alex outlined?
Sure. So, like Alex said, with the start of the pandemic, we saw that shift. We saw, 95 to 97% of workforces shifting to working from home. And what we saw with that was really the end of perimeter-based security. So, that privilege of that companies had of kind of knowing where their perimeter ended and what they needed to protect, that kind of went away. So the attack surface, as we mentioned, became much larger, much more amorphous. You've got to worry about every device that's now on your system, including home networks. And, you really don't have policies in place to enforce router patching or updates on personal devices that you can have with company devices. So, you had that expansion of attack surface, you had that sort of end of the perimeter, and cyber criminals and other threat actors took note of that. So it really kind of became a, for lack of a better way to put it, target rich environment. So they were quick to adapt to that. And so, that's driving a lot of it, as well as, the increase in vulnerabilities we've seen over the last couple of years, the number of vulnerabilities, the speed with which they're exploited. And again, it's not just now on corporate devices that you have to worry about that. It's on personal devices as well that can provide that initial access. So, when you kind of combine all of those things, it just makes it much more difficult for companies to protect their data, their people, and their intellectual property.
So we talked about the complexities, the challenges of the expanding attack surface, the increase in cyber threats. Mike, are there any advantages? Let's talk about some of the opportunities that hybrid models present in terms of managing security controls. What are those positives that are out there for organizations?
Sure, you've probably heard a lot lately about discussions around zero trust architecture, and there's a lot more conversation around that as a way to sort of adapt to and introduce that flexibility. There are certainly a lot of other benefits just as far as recruitment and employee satisfaction and benefits around that. But when it comes to the security side, these conversations that you're hearing around zero trust architecture and the move towards that really help things out quite a bit, because you're limiting access to data in a way that you really couldn't previously. Before, there was sort of an assumption of trust, and this requirement to constantly revalidate before data is accessed or unencrypted really kind of makes things much more secure. So, out of that difficulty, those opportunities definitely have arisen.
That's good. That's good to hear that there's a lot of positives out there in terms of combating the complexity and the challenges, because organizations don't have a choice. We talked about really needing to reevaluate their cybersecurity posture, their controls, what's in place, the human factor. We looked back at 2023. Here we are in very early 2024, but of course, we anticipate continued volatility in the cybersecurity environment. The geopolitical environment, obviously quite complex there. It presents a larger backdrop against which a lot of the trends that we're going to see in 2024 are going to play out. A lot of old threats are going to continue to persist, as well as some of the new ones. And we wanted to highlight that today. Alex, starting with you, let's talk about what you see in 2024 with respect to ransomware.
Yeah, sure. So the ransomware thing is kind of an interesting use case, because what you'll see if you study the attacker environment over time is they tend to use and stick with what's working until it doesn't. And I talk all the time about how the security industry is essentially an arms race, right? The bad guys come up with a method or a mechanism to do their dirty work. The defending community comes up with a defense to that method, and then the bad guys go to the next thing. And we're constantly kind of approaching that. The interesting thing with ransomware is that it's been so successful for so long that we don't really see a whole lot of change in the environment, right? Ransomware is still a huge deal. And the bad guys understand, from multiple levels, that ransomware can be, very effective. One, if they encrypt these machines and, they attain control of an environment, fairly comprehensively, it gives them the ability to do a lot of things as far as, data exfiltration, which Mike will get into, but also, things like insurance are playing a part. So, so the general rule that most people will tell you is don't ever pay the ransom, folks,
Right.
because all that does is encourage them.
Yep.
But we've got an insurance process now that says if you're, you can pay for this program, and if something happens and you get, hit by ransomware and you have to pay $2 million, your policy will cover it. So it doesn't, incentivize the good guys to not pay the ransom when they know that they're going to be made whole by their insurance policy. Now, what happens after that, as far as premiums and who will insure you and how, is,
Yeah,
obviously a huge question. But the insurance
correct.
thing, I think, is playing a big part. And then again, that move towards data loss and ransoming data as part of a ransomware intrusion is a big part of what we're seeing kind of going forward.
From a technical perspective, Alex, with the rise, the proliferation of ransomware, the success that it's had for so long, what does it highlight from a technical perspective that organizations really need to do? Patching comes to mind, for example.
Yeah, patching, that's a great example, right? Being able to make sure you're patching things frequently and regularly as they become more important from a security standpoint. And what I mean by more important are, are they being actively targeted by bad guys? Are there active exploits out there? Are there proofs of concepts that would allow a bad guy to create an active exploit? CISA, the government agency that's managing a lot of information security work right now, publishes a commonly exploited vulnerability list, and a great way to start patching and making sure that you have those things covered, because they're tracking that the bad guys are using these things. Patching is not just a ransomware thing; it is a security thing. It's one of the primary things you should be doing to help keep your environment secure. And I think if you look historically, the statistics show that most intrusions use exploits or vulnerabilities that are 18 months old, right? So they're not new. It's just stuff that the bad guys know work, and they've got well-developed exploitation process around.
Right. Mike, we've seen ransomware groups shift from an attack perspective from encryption to data infiltration, which is making data loss prevention really critical, more important than ever for organizations to really combat ransomware. And it's kind of one of those things that Alex kind of alluded to, everything old is new again. What are some of the trends that we're going to see as a result of data loss prevention becoming so much more important? And what actions do organizations need to take?
Yeah, so as Alex mentioned, I'll bring up patching again. That's critical, and that data loss prevention, making sure that your data loss prevention controls are in place, not just against massive data exfiltration and detecting sort of that massive data exfiltration, but against low and slow tactics as well. So threat actors get into your environment and just try and quietly pass out data bit by bit rather than in one big chunk. So there's a couple of different ways you have to look at data loss prevention as part of that too. A lot of what's driving that is that it's the data getting out that's really forcing the collection of that money is what these threat actors are starting to realize. And it's much faster to just focus on data exfiltration. If you think about it as sort of trying to break into a building and lock the doors behind you versus just a smash and grab, that's kind of the difference. So data encryption isn't going anywhere. That certainly is going to remain a major tactic and a key part of ransomware. But I think what we'll see is sort of a growing plurality of data exfiltration as a tactic within these ransomware groups, as they realize that, hey, they can get just as much money and faster if they take that approach. Because we're also seeing one of the trends that we've seen over the last couple of years, and especially over the last 12 to 18 months, is that increase in speed for ransomware infections from initial infection to action on target, and when they're getting that data out and submitting these ransom notes.
Right, that speed it continues to increase. One of the things that is becoming more of a reality, and Alex and Mike, I want to talk to both of you about this, going back to Alex first, the move to passwordless authentication. We're seeing that become much more of a reality in 2024. Alex, talk about why that is so incredibly important.
Yeah, that's another great question. So, passwordless, I talked about the arms race earlier. Passwordless is the next step in the identity and access management arms race, right? Because I've got, this username password centric IT program, for lack of a better term, that we've used for many, 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 many years. Bad guys know that. The username password market is healthy. There's lots of breaches that are published every day, and passwordless is an attempt to get out of the password world. You can think of it as the next step from multi-factor. Right now, it's been great. We've been actively looking for bad guys talking about passwordless and attacks against passwordless, and largely they've been fairly minimal at this point. that's, not to say that with the added attention that we see in the new year, that's not going to change. It likely will, where the bad guys will focus a little bit more, and then we'll be at that next step of the arms race. We'll see how they are able to exploit and act on the passwordless technology, and we'll come up with controls for it. So yeah, next step in the arms race.
Next step in the arms race. Mike, what are your thoughts on passwordless authentication? As it becomes more commercially available, expect to see more organizations and technology providers offering the feature. What are some of the positives that you see?
Sure. I mean, just that extra layer of protection. So, the phishing resistance that's inherent in passwordless technology, especially FIDO2 passwordless technology, the protection around those credentials, the difficulty in getting them out. As Alex mentioned, when we monitor those threat actor conversations in some of these cyber criminal forums, we see a desire to target this, but really what we haven't seen is a lot of purchase gained in ways to do that. So, they're not necessarily discussing getting their hands on the keys, these pass keys, but rather trying to kind of shift more to session tokens. So, we see some discussion around session hijacking, and you can see some of that start to play out in some of the recent reporting on some of the tactics that we're seeing in some of these info stealers. So, that's great. Anytime you can shift those threat actors off their game and force them to reconsider how they're operating, what data they need to get, that's great. It disrupts them. It gives, the cyber defenders an opportunity to then shore up where they're going next. In this instance, especially with the shift to passkeys, it's pretty easy to see where these threat actors will probably move next. We're certainly already having conversations around that, and checking the doors and windows. So that's what's great. Anytime you can kind of disrupt that game and get ahead of them, you're in good shape.
Exactly. That's a winning combination. Let's wrap up here talking about defense and offense. And of course, here we are in 2024. No conversation about the cybersecurity threat landscape would be complete without a discussion of AI and its impact on the landscape. Question both Alex for you, and Mike, we'll start with you, Alex. We see the massive rise of AI across a variety of applications. How do you expect to see AI really impacting both the defensive measures that organizations can take with respect to cybersecurity, as well as the offensive?
Yeah, that's another great question. So I'm an AI enthusiast, and obviously I've talked, in these forums about AI previously. And what's been really interesting to me, and being a fan of seeing how disruptive technologies develop, you basically have two kind of forms of AI right now that are, being marketed. One is a new company being stood up that has an AI, centric approach to the market. That's, hey, we're going to solve all your problems with AI. And then the other one is, here's a tool you've been using, for 20 years plus AI. And what the interesting thing about that is, it's kind of making old tools, or tools that maybe were somewhat out of their lifespan, kind of new again. Chat bots, that sort of thing, like the ability for a AI tool, AI chat bot to communicate with you in a way that's a much more comprehensive and robust than you've been able to do previously with chat bots. Super, super useful. From an attacker standpoint, the primary thing we're seeing right now is around phishing. This idea that I can craft a, repeatable, very human language centric way of communicating with a phishing email that doesn't have that bad use of English language that's been a trigger, or an indicator for the good guys for a long time, certainly playing a part. And I think we'll continue to see that as the AI world kind of develops and these tools become available in APIs. The bad guys, like they always do, will leverage these new technologies in ways that are interesting. The really interesting thing about the AI world is that it's moving so fast that there's new tech every day, and it's a little bit difficult to keep up with. So this year I think is going to be huge, obviously from a security standpoint for AI. And if you look at a lot of the conferences, everybody's talking about AI. If you look at tool sets, everybody's talking about AI. NIST just published a top threats against AI guidance, which obviously is very important. So it's really hard to say where it's going to go because of how active and fast moving it is right now. But we are certain that the bad guys are going to leverage it more. And like I said, the phishing right now is probably one of the bigger indicators.
I just came from the Consumer Electronics Show last week in Las Vegas, and the theme was AI, AI, AI. It's everywhere. And there was a lot of really good applications of it that the public doesn't, I think, get as many opportunities to see and hear. Mike, take us out here with some of the offensive capabilities and measures that AI is going to be able to enable organizations to implement in 2024.
Sure. So there's a couple of different things, and primarily it's really going to be around speed of detection. One of the things that AI is really great at, and as it's incorporated more thoroughly into defensive tools, detecting sort of anomalous behavior and picking that out of big data, just massive amounts of logs, being able to pick things up more quickly, which goes back to what I was mentioning earlier when it comes to data loss prevention. That sort of anomalous behavior detection is going to make a huge difference. And when we think about sort of 2024 from a threat intelligence perspective and all the different ways that that AI is going to impact the overall threat environment, it's a year for a threat intelligence analyst to sort of get comfortable being uncomfortable, because there's a lot of ways things are going to change. Alex did a great overview on some of the ways things will change. You mentioned geopolitical issues at the top of the call. The way AI is going to start to impact deep fakes, especially when half of the globe is facing a nationwide election in some way or another this year, both on the detection and creation sides. The advancements in AI and how that can change malware and obfuscation and delivery with the stats Alex mentioned around phishing. It's going to be an interesting year, and it makes trying to make any call about 2025 impossible right now almost.
That's okay. You're forgiven. It's January 2024. Guys, this has been such a great conversation of what you saw last year, what you think we might see in 2024. And this is the third in our LastPass Lab series. Alex and Mike, I want to thank you both so much for joining me. I always learn a ton from you guys. I know our audience does as well. And we have a call to action for you, audience. Anyone going to be in Silicon Valley February 13th? Alex is speaking at the Cybersecurity Summit in Silicon Valley on Feb 13th, speaking on a panel. Alex, anything you want to tease the audience with in terms of what they might hear from you on that panel?
We're going to be talking about kind of all things identity and some of the worries and concerns you have to have there. So it should be a good talk.
I'm sure it would be fantastic. We're going to pop a link in as well to that event, as well as a number of great blogs Alex and Mike have written. I read them recently preparing for this conversation. There's a top cybersecurity trends of 2023 part 1 and part 2 blog. There's also LastPass 2024 predictions, which we got to double click into today. 9 cybersecurity trends to watch in 2024, and a great roundtable, key takeaways from 23, what's ahead in 24, part 1. We'll put the links here. We appreciate you giving us the time today to listen to this great conversation between these two experts. Alex and Mike, once again, thank you so much. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.